Hello, everybody. I'm Happy Caldwell, and I want to thank you for joining me every day this week for a special message on Arkansas Alive called The Mystery of Iniquity. What is the mystery of iniquity? Well, the Bible tells us, and you'll find out that understanding what iniquity is, its source, where it comes from, and what it's capable of, it will explain to you what's going on in our culture right now today, where lawlessness, violence, all the things that you see every day in the secular media, whether it's print or on television or radio or whatever. So stay tuned. Arkansas Live starts right now. I'd like to read to you some information that my producer gave me that I asked him to find. I've heard this before, but I couldn't remember it all. This has to do with what we're going to study this week, the mystery of iniquity. First of all, in Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7, it says, "As he thinketh in his heart, so is he." What a man thinks about in his heart is what he's going to become. Now, what we hear and see on television, in papers, in periodicals, in magazines, on social media sites, what we're inundated with every day. You might have never thought about this. You might think it's inconsequential. You might think it doesn't matter, or I'm just, blowing things out of proportion. But the Bible tells us that what we think about is what we will become. You've heard it said, you are what you eat. Well, it's true, but it's also true, you are or will become what you hear. God designed you that way for faith to inundate your heart, your spirit, and for your faith to be released. The Bible says faith comes by hearing, hearing by the Word of God. But if you reverse that premise, destruction, doubt, anxiety, worry, all of that comes by hearing too. It's a spiritual principle. What a man thinks about in his heart, what he constantly hears, is what he is going to become. And that, my friend, is what has happened to our culture. Now, here are the statistics, so you'll know that I'm just not fault-finding. Here's some information for you. Crime in the news media. A 2018 study found that individuals who were exposed to violent media content were 3.8 times more likely to engage in that violent behavior. Depending on whose numbers you use, the crime rate nationally has fallen to 49% to 73% between 1993 and 2017. Yet 6 out of 10 Americans polled by Gallup in 2018 say they feel like crime has gone up. Now, you can't measure accurately by these figures because police departments, law enforcement, everybody has a different formula by which they compute these figures. So, it's entirely possible that Chicago or New York City might have a lower crime rate than Little Rock, Arkansas, depending on how they compute their figures. Last year, New Orleans, Louisiana was noted as the murder capital of the world. You are quicker to lose your life in the city of New Orleans than you are anywhere in the United States or around the world. I remember years ago I was preaching in a church in Dodge City, Kansas. You know Dodge City, that's where Matt Dillon was the U.S. Marshal. Of course, that's a fantasy, that's a television series. But the pastor of the church I was ministering at asked me if I would like to go down and see the historical place where Dodge City got its name from? I said, sure. It was a cow town. They brought herds in there from Texas, from everywhere in the country, and it is still processing about 1,000 head of cattle a day. And of course, the methods are different, and the town is different. It hasn't gotten much bigger than it was in the 1860s, where Gunsmoke was supposed to have taken place. But they have a historical record. The guy that played Newley, the blacksmith, is the only one out of the cast that's still living, and he may still be living today. But he does a video and tells you how Dodge City came to pass, and where it got its name, what went on, and in its heyday, he says that Dodge City, Kansas, was the murder capital of the world. And I thought, my goodness. He said, yeah, because they have Boot Hill outside the town. It's in the same location it was originally, right by the railroad tracks. And of course, they've replicated the TV series Gunsmoke with the Long Branch and Dodge House and all that kind of stuff. And they said, yeah, Dodge City was a murder capital because there was no law and anybody could kill anybody at any time for any reason. And he said, you would take your life in your hands if you walk down Front Street, minding your own business, and some cowboy come through and feel like shooting you and kill you dead right in the streets. And that's the way it was back in the 1860s in Dodge City, Kansas. Well, it's kind of like that in some cities, including Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. You can lose your life real quick. You can just be going to the grocery store, taking your kids to school. So you ask yourself this question: why can't anybody do anything about this? Why don't they do something about it? What about law enforcement? Hey, they sold a lot of these cities a bill of goods. The woke culture said, defund the police. We don't need them, blah, blah, blah. Well, you see how stupid that was, and you see the result of it. You take your life in your hands when you just get on the highway. You might be going to church, and some gang member's charged with drive-by shooting, and he pulls up beside you and shoots you because that's the culture. That's what they hear. That's what they see all the time. So listen to the rest of these figures. Historically, much of this fear has been attributed to the media. Think nightly local news broadcasts that inevitably start off with violent crime. And newspaper tabloids lived up to the "if it bleeds, it leads" adage. And you see that. You mark it down, whether you're watching this at 7 in the morning or 10 at night. You watch the local newscasts or the national newscasts and see if they don't start off their narrative with a news special or a breakthrough or a crime or a shooting or a death or somebody found dead. See if they don't lead off with those murder statistics, those crime statistics. And they do that to catch your attention. And because that draws viewers. If it leads, it bleeds. The worse it is, the better it is to start off the newscast. And according to recent studies, mass media serves as a primary source of information about crime up to 95% of the general public, the evening news. Moreover, findings report up to 50% of news coverage is devoted solely to the stories about crime. 50%, half, is devoted to stories about crime. Now, if that's what you hear every day, and a lot of people watch the news all day long, news networks, they listen to all the bad, and it's repeated. It's over and over. And it'll cover one whole day. The next day, it'll cover again. And it just keeps on going. You might hear the coverage of the same story for 2, 3, 4, 5 days before it goes to something else. Taking 25 editions of newspapers in the cities of the U.S., it was found that 30% of crime stories were murderers, when in fact that only 0.2% of the crimes in those cities are murderers. So that tells you right there that the media, and I don't care whether it's television, radio, printed page, apps, media sites, social media, it doesn't make any difference. They're inflating the number of murders. Why would they do that? Viewers, numbers, selling advertisers. That's why they do it. Remember Ted Koppel? He used to be in the media news anchor. I don't remember what network. But when he retired or stepped down, he made some comments about the media business. And he said that he was told that it doesn't make any difference how he does it, but the number one goal is to make money. That's what he was told. He said our end game is money. That's the whole purpose that we're here. And he said they don't care how you do it, as long as what you're doing makes money. Okay. A statistical snapshot. Numerous studies over the past half century have tracked crime coverage in particular media outlets over varying lengths of time. For instance, one group of researchers studied local TV news programs appearing on 3 channels in Orlando, Florida, for a period of 3 weeks. Now, here's what they found. Most broadcasts begin with a crime story. About 1/4 of the stories covered on air were crime related, excluding weather, sports, and anchor chit-chat. More than 2/3 of the crime stories were focused on violent crime. By contrast, only 18% of the crime in Orlando was violent. So again, it was elevated. It was not factual. It was hype. It was misrepresentation. But that's what you heard. And you hear these things, and you begin to believe these things. And Proverbs 7 says that what you hear, what you think about in your heart, is what you will become. Now think about all the young people that hear this. I hear different races of people saying at different times when they watch television or movies or whatever, they say, I don't see myself represented in this. I don't see my race, my color. I don't see what I look like show up in the movies or on television. So they're looking for an identity. And all they see is the gangbangers and the rappers and the whatever, and that's what they identify with. And they're listening, and it's going into them. Follow along with me. Studies of other news media outlets have found similar patterns. Non-news related violence on television. An average American young person will witness 200,000. That's almost 250,000 violent acts on television before they're 18. 60% of the programs contain some violence, and about 40% of those certain heavy violence. Weapons appear on primetime television on an average of 9 times an hour. Violent weapons, weapons of destruction and death, on primetime television. If you're watching a police story, if you're watching a mystery, if you're watching crime, you're going to see a weapon appear each hour. So those are the statistics, my friend. And Proverbs 23:7 says, as you think in your heart, that's what you'll become. So Why do we have these problems in the culture? Now, Hollywood argues with you, media may argue with you, that all they're doing is reporting what's happening. No, you can see by the statistics, they're creating a lot of misinformation, and they're flooding the airwaves and flooding the social media sites with all kinds of violence and crime, so that it almost becomes, in some people's thoughts, this is normal behavior. Our young people think this is normal behavior because, unfortunately, they don't have anything to compare it with. And you've heard me digress along these lines before. And I don't do this to be critical. I don't mean to go down nostalgia road, but I take the 50s generation, the 40s and 50s generation, which was my generation. We were the kids that were born during World War II, and we were raised after 1940s, and we were raised in a different culture, different environment. First place, there was no television. Now, you can laugh at this and scoff at it if you want to, but this is being borne out as factual all the time. There was no television. I didn't see my first television set until I was 10 years old. So I grew up without television. We listened to radio, but you didn't hear this on radio. And as we were growing up, our model was the family. Our parents were the models. Our parents guided us into what was right and what was wrong. And we suffered the consequences at an early age, which was a spanking. We suffered the consequences of doing anything wrong, rebellion. Nobody I knew in my family, my neighborhood, my time, nobody ever smarted off at their parents. Nobody ever backtalked their parents. It wasn't done. It wasn't heard of. It was respect. It was reverence. Now, I understand there are kids today say, well, I don't have any parents, or I didn't have any, or I couldn't respect my parents. They were stupid. They were drunkards, alcoholics, whatever. I understand all that, but I'm just trying to show you the difference in the culture. We're talking about the mystery of iniquity. And if you delve far enough into it, look at the word mystery. It means unknown. It means not yet revealed. Well, I've spoken about these things for years. In fact, I did an entire teaching on poverty. Poverty is cyclical from one generation to another. If you're born into poverty, you will learn poverty. Behavior is learned. And you will learn about poverty because of the family, the household, the neighborhood, the city, the culture in which you are born and living. I found out that we teach these things to our children whether we even realize what we're doing or not. But a lot of kids are trapped in poverty because that's all they see. And they just repeat it. If dad's a drunkard, if dad's sloppy, if he beats mom, that's the way the child's going to be raised. We had a couple in our church years ago. This was, I guess, before or at the time, where the law required even pastors to report child abuse in the church to the officials. And if you didn't do it, you could be liable. Well, we had a couple in our church that, the nursery workers noted that the children came in every Sunday morning. They had bruises all over them. So they reported it to me. Well, I first called the parents in, and I explained to them what we were dealing with, and I said, I'll have to report this. And this is what the father told me. He said, Pastor, my wife and I were both abused children. We grew up with that. It's hard to make the difference between what is right and what's wrong when you're raised one way and then you're confronted with another way of living. Well, in psychiatry, when they talk about child psychiatry, they say children that are abused will eventually become abusers. If you are abused, you will eventually become an abuser. Why? Because you've been raised in that atmosphere. It's cyclical, just like poverty. That's why when Lyndon Johnson wanted to create a war on poverty, and he attempted to attempted to stop poverty in the United States, it sounded really good, but it was a joke. It was, and he wound up with egg on his face because he never stopped poverty, and nobody has ever stopped poverty. Money is not the solution and the answer to poverty. I wish our politicians could get a hold of that. I wish our presidents and our administrators in Washington, D.C. would get a hold of that. You cannot stop poverty with money. You have to go all the way back to the beginning, and you have to start creating an atmosphere for prosperity. You have to teach it. You have to model it. You have to show the benefits of it. Not greed, not self-fulfillment, but for the benefit of other people. When God told the Israelites in Deuteronomy 8:18, he said, I'm going to give you the power to get wealth. He tells them why. So, listen to this. He said, I'm going to give you the power to get wealth so I can establish my covenant in the earth. The purpose for the wealth, the purpose for them being empowered to obtain wealth or to get wealth, or provision, if you want to call it provision, was so that he could establish his covenant in the earth with believers, with his children, those that believed in him, believed in Christ, believed in God. So your cyclical poverty environment just reproduces itself. I mean, if you create the atmosphere of prosperity. Now, we grew up in poverty because my father came out of the Great Depression and then fought in World War II, then came home and rebuilt America. That was called the Builder's Generation. That's the generation that I was born into. And we saw sacrifice and we saw hardship, but yet we also saw the other side of what hard work and honesty would do. And so that's what I was taught. The worst thing that I could ever experience as a kid when I was going to school, if I came home with my report card, and in those days we got character checks. We got satisfactory and unsatisfactory for our character, our behavior. Not on one side was the grades, A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, F, but on the other side was your character evaluation. And I would get in more trouble if I got an unsatisfactory character report than if I got a D or an F. My father would not tolerate unsatisfactory character reports. And so, man, I worked hard to maintain my character ratings of satisfactory because he was raising me, he was teaching me to be a certain kind of person. Well, you don't have that today because too many families are fatherless. Too many families are one single-parent homes, mostly the mother. And the fathers are not held accountable, held responsible. I know this recent trial that they had where they are suing and probably incarcerating the mother and the father of the young kid that shot his teacher. And people think that's horrible, that's terrible. They're not responsible for their child's action. Oh, yes, they are. Until you bring that child up to the age of accountability where they're accountable for their own behavior, you're responsible. And you will be known for how you raise your children because your children reflect you. If you see an unruly child, a disobedient child, a rebellious child, a violent child, it's probably because of their environment, their parents, the home they live in or the home they don't have. And listen what happens to these kids. When they leave the role model of the father and the mother, or if it's non-existent, they will go to somebody in society. They'll go to an athlete. They'll go to a Hollywood star. they'll go to some other individual to derive their self-worth and their identity from. So it behooves us, according to the Scriptures, to be careful what we teach and say, because our children are going to emulate that. And that's the reason my generation, and this is not a pat on the back because everybody wasn't perfect, but that's the reason my generation didn't go off the deep end. And, it wasn't until the 60s. The 50s was one of the best times to live in this country and in the world ever. They made movies about it. They made a TV program about it. They've made all kinds of things about the 50s. Why? Because we just come out of a world war. There was revival in the land. There was prosperity in the land. All the husbands and wives that served in the war overseas came home, and we rebuilt America. It was a wonderful time. It wasn't perfect. There was crime, but not like you see today. Why? Because of the generation, because of the culture, because of the family. And we don't have that today. And that's why you're seeing a lot of violence and iniquity and lawlessness. And I'm going to get further into that. But I wanted to give you that brief thumbnail sketch about what's going on and why it's going on. It doesn't just happen. And it's not God mad at America or the world. It's not Satan running free. It's iniquity. And it's a mystery to many people. And that's what we're going to resolve this week, I hope. So I encourage you to stay tuned. And then I'm going to tell you a little story I think will help you. There are things that you can do. There are things that we can do as a culture, even today. Even if your children are grown, even if you have grandchildren or great-grandchildren, there's still things that you can do as a citizen, as a Christian, to confront and slow down this mystery of iniquity. So I'll start off with that tomorrow and tell you, and it's been proven, it's been done right here in the U.S. So join me tomorrow, Arkansas Live, the mystery of iniquity. And remember, Jesus is Lord of Arkansas and where you're watching too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on X at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.